In this Photoshop demo, I'm going to show you how to properly and successfully colorize a black and white photo. Now, this is a demo that you will not have if you are part of one of my computer graphics classes. This is just a demo that I will do on my screen to show you how the project will be done. And I will introduce you to that project in a subsequent video. But for now, I'm going to go in and open up a file that only I have on my computer. And you can see right there, it's called 7.0. If you're in my class, you will not have this. Colorizing black and white photos demo. This is not something you're going to be turning in. This is a way for me to show you how to do it. Okay, so I want to make that really clear. I have this old vintage photo of my grandfather when he was a tiny little boy, and I want to colorize it. First, as you can see, the photo is crooked. So if you have any crooked photos, you click once on your crop tool. Right up here, you have a straighten level. So I'm going to click that. And then I'm just going to line up the little plus right along the bottom edge of the photo and drag a long measurement line. That's going to measure the angle of the photo. So when I let go of the mouse, it's going to rotate at the opposite angle. It'll straighten out the photo. Now I can come in on the corners and just crop in on this image right here. Remember, pulling a little bit inside the edge of the photo so you don't have a little sliver of white space. Just want to cut into that photo, guaranteeing you're going to be left with just photography, not a bunch of white space. And we'll pull this in right here. So once I have a successful crop, I will hit enter on a PC or return on my Mac, and there's a nice clean cropped photo. What I would also like to show people is a before and after. So what I'm going to do is zoom out so I have lots of room around my file, and I'm going to hit the letter D for default colors. Okay, before I do anything, I want to make a copy of this photo. This will be one for before and one for after. Okay, so on a Mac, you hit Command and J to make a copy jump to another layer. On a PC, you would hit Control and J to jump to another layer. Now the trick here is to add more space, you need to come back down to your background layer. Then when you activate your crop tool, you can extend the crop. So I'm going to extend it right here. This little center point means I have doubled the amount of space, but I'm going to drag it a little further out so I could have a little gap between the two photos. Then I'm going to drag a little space above and a little space below and a little space to the left. So when I do that, it kind of pulls this back, so I'll pull a little bit more space to the right. So I have a little white border around my photos. I've got enough room for a copy of the photo, and I think this looks pretty good. It's kind of like setting up a double matted frame. Okay, so that looks pretty good right there. Again, on a PC, I hit enter. On a Mac, I hit return. Now I take the copied photo, I go to my move tool, and I click and drag. And remember, as you start to click and drag, this photo is going to go all over the place. So as you start to pull it, now when you get over here, you can hold your shift key and it will go straight across. So they're lined up. Okay, when I get that positioned right about there, I'm going to let go of my mouse first, then my keyboard. Just as a reminder, I'm going to double click the name layer 1 and we'll call that after. So the photo on the right is the one we're going to be colorizing. Now, this is typical of vintage photography. They turn kind of a brownish gray, kind of a sepia tone, if you will. Well, in order to colorize a photo, some of this brownish gray, some of this yellowish tone will affect some of the saturation and tones of the colors that you're going to be using to colorize the photo. And we don't want this yellowish brown to interact with the other colors that we're going to be using to color tint the photo. So to give us better color qualities, I'm going to desaturate this photo by going to Image menu, Adjustments, Black and White. You can see right there, there was a lot of yellow in this photo. You can see the instant change from before and after. And this looks pretty good just as it is. I don't need to make any other changes. It's got a significant amount of grayscale, which is great for colorizing photos. The more gray, the more color you're going to see. So this is good. I don't want it to be too bright because then my colors are going to be too bright. And I'm just going to leave it as it is and click OK. Okay, the next thing you want to do is always create a new layer for each new color. So let's say I want to paint his hair kind of a light brown. I'm going to create a brand new layer. I'll double click the name and we'll call that brown hair. Okay, then very specifically, I'm going to zoom in real close on those details. And I'll mix a shade of brown. Now keep in mind, whatever color you are using to color tint, you want to use a color slightly darker than what you plan on, because a tint is a lighter shade of that color. So if I wanted his hair to be light brown, I wouldn't come up here, right in these areas right here, and go with a light brown, because it's going to be lighter than that. So I want to go a little darker than what I plan on using, right about there. Okay, that's a little darker than what I hope it's going to be, and that's good because it will lighten up. I click OK. Then you set the layer's blending mode from normal flat color to overlay. Now I'll show you what I mean. If I take my paintbrush and on a Mac, I hold Control key and Option key. Will make my brush a little bigger. I also notice this is an old photo. There's a slight blur to it. So I'm going to click and drag up to give the hardness maybe a 60% right there. So it's got a slight blur to the edge of the brush as well. And you'll notice if the layer is set to normal, you're just going to paint normal brown paint over a photo. Well, that's kind of ridiculous because you're covering the photo. So the proper way to colorize a photo is you set your layer's blending mode to overlay, and you will get a tint of color. Now that brown is way darker than what I had ever planned on using. I don't think you would have that brown of a hair color. But that's a good way to start, because right next to your blending modes are your opacity settings. So I can lower that down, say that's about the color that I wanted his hair to be, right about there. A little blonde, blondish brown, like that. So now when I continue painting, it's just going to keep picking up that color. And I'm going to go right along this hairline. You know, the problem here is, where does his hair end and his face begin? So I have to define one of these edges. So I would either paint the skin right up to this edge, or I would paint the hair. And the hair is a simpler area, so I'm going to start with his hair. If you get into tight spaces, just make your brush a little smaller right in there, and we'll just kind of brush that around right up in there. Then I can fill in the rest. So what I would always focus on is focus on the edges first. Okay, I'll focus on this outer edge right here, the defining edge of that block of hair. Then I can fill in the rest quite easily, but I really have to focus when I'm painting edges. I don't have to focus when I'm just filling things in. I really have to slow down when I come down here and go right along the edge of his head And we'll come in with a really small brush to get into these little corner spots right here. And I'll focus on those edges. Now let's say I do that and I make a mistake. I'm going to keep going. Okay, don't worry about that. It's not the end of the world. Let's say I make a couple of mistakes like that. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to keep going. I want to completely cover that hair, like putting a nice little colored wig on his head. Okay, if I make a mistake like this, you always have the backup of a layer mask. So let's say I'm having trouble with this corner too. If I can't get it, paint over the corner. Then you create a layer mask. Add layer mask. Every time you add a layer mask, which is your eraser, you hit D for default colors and then X for black. And now when I paint with black, I can scrape off that corner right there. I can scrape off all this paint because I didn't want to paint on the wall. And I just go back and forth. So let's say I accidentally do that and I scrape away too much hair. Not a problem there either. I hit the letter X for white and I put the paint back on. So you can always go back and forth. It kind of frees you up for making a few errors here and there because we're only human. We're going to make mistakes. So layer masks allow us to cover for those mistakes. So now I can zoom out and I've got a nice little colored head of hair. Okay, once that is done, once I know I have erased and I cleaned it up, I click once on the mask, click once on the trash, and apply. Permanently erase the edges. The brown hair is done. Then I'm going to start down below that color and I'm going to make another brand new layer for another brand new color. I'll double click there and we'll call that skin. Okay, again, I'll click on my foreground color and usually, typically skin tones are going to be in this reddish brown area down in here. I'll go with a lighter reddish brown, almost like an orange color right there. And then I'm going to zoom in and paint his head. Okay, the problem is how far do I paint and make the skin line up with the edge of the hair? When two colors butt up next to each other, how do you know when to stop? And the simple answer is you don't. The simple solution is you paint over the edges. So here's how this works. I'm going to set my layers blending mode to overlay. I'm going to take that same brush and I'm going to start by just dabbing a little color here. Okay, I don't want him to look like one of those Oompa Loompa characters from Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. So I'm going to lower the opacity way, way down. Every time you let go, you can see a result. Let go, you'll see a result. So I want just a little hint of color right there. Okay, now when I paint, and if that color is a little bit too light, make it darker as you paint. You can always lower that later. So the simple solution is I paint right over the edge of his hair. I want to make sure the skin goes right up to the edge of the hair. So I go over the edge of the hair. You start by making a mess. Okay, go over the edges to guarantee the skin goes right up to the hairline. And I'm going to come in and paint all this area right in here as carefully as I can. You know, again, if you do that, it's no big deal. We'll clean that up later. But I want to go over the hairline, go right up into this ear, right there, and kind of focus on the edge of the face, right down there to the collar. Now I can go back in on this edge, and I go over the corner, come back up, and notice again I'm focusing on the edges of the skin tone first. I can color in the rest very easily in a minute. And now I color in the rest. Okay, again, he looks really freaky being this bright orange kid, but you got to keep in mind he's not going to stay that color. I'm just blocking it in so I can see where I'm dropping in skin tones. Okay, and I'm going to come down here, and you'll notice his arm was slightly moving, so it's got more of a blur. So I hold Control and Option on my Mac. That would be Control, Alt, and your right mouse button on your mouse to adjust the size of the brush. And if I go up, I can make the brush a little more blurry to accommodate this more blurry edge to his arm right there, because he had a slight movement to it. Okay, so we'll go down in here and we'll go right up against that fabric of his clothing. I'll come in with a smaller brush, kind of get into these little fingertips there. Get that little blurry fingertip, and that blurry fingertip, and that one. Then I'll color in all the rest. There we go. Now his other arm wasn't moving, so I'm going to adjust my brush and go back down a little bit to about a 60% or so. 65. And we'll come in with a small brush and just kind of hit those fingertips right there. And I'm going to try to minimize the amount of cleanup I have to do later. I don't want to go way out here, but if I do, it's no big deal. It's just more I have to clean up later on. So I want to try to focus right along these edges. Get that paint in there right along the edge of that arm. If I make a mistake, you always remember it's no big deal. You just keep on going. And I'll hit that fingertip right there. And we'll hit this fingertip right in here. All right. So now I've completely covered up all the skin tones. Now keep in mind, I went over the edge. So first, how do I make the skin stop right at the edge of the hair? Well, I already painted the edge of the hair. I did a perfect job right here. I defined the edge of the hair, which subsequently defined the edge of the skin. So here's the simple solution. I know I painted the hair right, so I go up to the brown hair on the layer thumbnail, and on a Mac, I hold Command and click. That will put a selection around the hairline. On a PC, you would Control click. So now I've defined that line where the skin should stop. So I come down to the skin and I hit Delete on my Mac or Backspace on my PC. The skin stops right on the edge of the hairline. Command D on a Mac, that'll be Control D on a PC. And now the skin lines up perfectly with the hairline. Now I've got a few mistakes out here, so that's going to require a layer mask. Every time you add a layer mask, it is D for default colors, X to switch to black because black erases. And I'll come in with a small brush and start scraping off that overpaint right there. I didn't want it to go on the wall. I didn't want it to go on his little jumpsuit here. I don't want it to go out here. So I'm just scraping away that extra paint edge right there. And I don't want it to go right in here. Clean up those edges. If I make a mistake and scrape away too much, X for white, and I cover up that mistake and put the paint back on. That's the beauty of layer masking. And I also don't want it on his eyes or his teeth, so I'm just going to zoom in even closer, take an even smaller brush, really small, and I'll just kind of scrape out this area with black. Black is your eraser on a layer mask. So we'll scrape out the whites of his eye and the colored part of his eye right there. We'll scrape out that little colored part and the white part of his eye right in there. And we'll scrape out the teeth so we don't get skin colored teeth. And again, if I scrape too much, X for white, and I put that color back on right there. There we go. All right, so now I zoom out and we have that color. So first, you clean up the edges, you clean up all the areas where you don't want skin tone, and now once that is done, you click on your layer mask right here, click on the trash, and apply. Permanently clean up those edges. Now it's a matter of adjusting the opacity. So I'll drag that down a little more. We'll give him a nice skin tone right there. Okay, cool. Now let's color in his eyes. Let's say he had blue eyes. Okay, I will make another brand new layer. Every new color gets a new layer. We'll call that blue eyes. I'll come in and pick a color darker than what I plan on. So come here, kind of a muted, kind of grayish blue right in here. A little darker than what I need. I'll zoom in a little closer. And again, I set the layers blending mode to overlay, and I paint. Now again, the skin tone comes right up to the edge of the blue. So I'm going to paint over. I'm going to go way over the edge like this and really paint that out. Paint over the edge. You want to make sure the blue is going right up to the skin tone. So you overpaint like that. Kind of painting and making a mess like a clown. But remember, without that, I painted a perfect edge for the skin. So again, I come down to the skin where the skin was painted correctly. I hold Command on a Mac and I click the layer thumbnail. That's Control on a PC, and I click the layer thumbnail. Now I have selected the edge of the skin. That's the edge where the blue should have stopped. I come up to the blue and I hit Delete on my Mac or Backspace on my PC. Now to deselect, it's Command D on my Mac or Control D on a PC. And I have eyes that are way, way, way too dark, which is fine because I have an opacity slider. So I could slide that back and give him just a hint of those blue eyes right there. Not much, so it doesn't look too artificial. Okay, there we go. Now the only thing left, pretty much, we'll give him a pair of brown shoes right down here. Kind of brown leather shoes, old leather. So I'll create another brand new layer. I'll double click the name. We'll call that brown leather shoes. I'm going to pick a color way down here into the brownish tones again. Maybe come down there like that. Maybe a little more reddish brown right there. There we go. We'll set that layer's blending mode to overlay. And I always focus on the outer edges first. So we'll just go right along this outer edge. Right down to there. Kind of bring that around, and maybe I'll make my brush a little more blurry because these shoes kind of have a soft focus right there. Just skimming that outer edge. Kind of hard to see, so I'm just going to kind of blindly paint up there over the edge of the pants. And we'll fill all that in right there. Now, obviously, that is way too dark. So let's see what it would look like if I lowered the opacity a little bit. Give him kind of a shoe like that. We'll come in right here. Kind of hit some of those edges. Always focus on the edges first, because the rest you can color in very quickly. I'll go over the pant leg right there. And we'll paint that out. There we go. Now, if I wanted the shoelaces, I could just go with a really, 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 really small brush and just hit a little shoelace right there. Hit a little shoelace that comes up and around right there. And I got a little shoelace right in here that I see. I think that's another little shoelace right there. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to come in with my layer mask. D for default colors. X to switch to black. And now I scrape away that edge. I want to define right where the edge of the pants should stop. Right there. I go all the way down right to the edge of those pant legs. Right there. Perfect. Let's zoom out and see what he's looking like. Okay, pretty good. I like that. Click on the layer mask. Click on the trash. And apply. And the other thing I forgot to mention, as I typically do, I would recommend every time you save or finish a layer, save your progress. I keep forgetting to save my progress. File menu, save a copy, and I will save that as a Photoshop file. I'm not done yet. Photoshop is kind of like a work in progress. I'm going to call this last name, first name, colorizing photos. On my desktop, I save it as a layered Photoshop file. And then again, this is still the original JPEG. So I have to close this up. I don't need to save this because I saved mine on my desktop. So now to pick up where I left off, file and open. There's my file with my name. There's my layers so I can pick up where I left off. And I'm going to come in and create one more final brand new layer. We'll just start at the bottom here. And I'm going to call this blue jumpsuit. I'll zoom in. I'll pick a shade of blue, kind of a grayish, muted kind of blue here, like that. I'll set the layer's blending mode to overlay, and I will focus on the edges first. Okay, so I'll come in and just hit those edges right there. I want to come in and hit that right along that edge as close as I can. I'll go over the edge of the shoes, because remember I defined that edge. So we'll hit the edge and maybe make that a little blurrier here. There we go. Go over the edge of the shoes where the two colors meet. And then I'll come in and hit those edges right there. I think it would help if I zoomed in a little more. And we'll just start to skim the outer edge of this pant leg right here. Some people often ask me, like, how do you paint so smoothly? And the trick is don't breathe. I sometimes forget to breathe when I'm painting, but that allows me to keep a pretty steady hand here as I go. And we'll go right up there. Let's go over the edge because we've already defined the edge of the skin tones. So I'm going to go right over those edges of the skin, hit the outer edge of that arm, or that sleeve, I should say. Overlap all your edges right there. Overlap all your edges. You want to make sure you cover right where the fabric meets the skin. And now we'll go right up along that shoulder. Right up along that collar. And like I always say, if you make a mistake, keep going. You can clean those up. That's what layer masks are for. I want to paint all the way over the edge of the skin because I want to make sure the fabric meets the skin. So we'll cover all that up. Then we'll go right along the edge of that collar. Okay, that's a more pointed collar, so I'll just go with a smaller brush right there. Get in there. And then we'll go with a bigger brush and hit the rest of that sleeve over here. And we'll hit that little bump right there. and just focus on the outer edges. Oops, I made a mistake. Who cares? You can clean it up later. Obviously, you don't want to make a bunch of mistakes, but a couple here and there are no big deal. Like I said, that's the beauty of layer masking. I want to cover up all the fabric right where it hits the skin, so I'll just overcompensate and just cover all of these edges like that. And then it picks up right here. We'll cover all that up. Hit down the edge of this other leg. Again, I just don't breathe while I paint. Give me a nice smooth edge. But I also don't like my videos to be silent, so I continuously talk in my videos. And we'll go right down to there. Okay, the rest is just filler. So I'll just come in with a slightly bigger brush, kind of help me to fill this up really quick. I don't have to worry about all these spaces. Those are easy to paint in. I had to slow down when I was painting along the edges. That's where I needed to be real precise. I don't need to be real precise for the fills right here. And I'm just going to keep coming in, maybe even a bigger brush, and just really wipe that color in. Smaller brush when I get closer to the edges right here for a little more control over my painting process. And we'll just keep hitting all the color. Block in all my color right there. All the color along the inside edges. And we'll just keep on going. But at least I have the outer edges. This is just a matter of taking time to fill in the rest. So let's go over here. Block in all that color. All the way down. And we'll see what he starts to look like. Looks like he's a worker in a little auto shop. Or a little budding Michael Myers. Got the whole blue jumpsuit thing going on here. All right. So now let's zoom out. And he's got his little blue jumpsuit. It looks like he's been playing with blue paint. But that's just the overlay. No big deal. Now let's clean up the edges, because obviously I painted where the skin or the blue hits the skin all over the place. So what I'm going to do is, since I know I painted the skin correctly, I've got these nice clean edges. I'm going to hover over the skin layer thumbnail, command click. Now I come down, or control click on a PC. You got to be on the thumbnail. Now I come down to the blue jumpsuit and I hit delete on my Mac or backspace on my PC. Command D on a Mac or Control D on a PC to deselect, and check that out. I've got nice edges where the blue meets the skin. Around the collar, the face, the hand, everything. Now I painted over his shoes, but you got to remember I painted his brown leather shoes with a perfect edge. So I'm going to use that same trick. I go to the brown leather shoes, command click on a Mac or control click the layer thumbnail on a PC. Now I come down to the blue jumpsuit, turn it on, and delete the overlap. So now the blue matches right along the edge of the brown leather shoes. The blue is nice and clean all the way up. I made a couple extra painting mistakes. That's the beauty of a layer mask. Every time you add a layer mask, it is D for default colors, X to switch to black, and I'll just zoom in so I can paint some good detail work here with a smaller detailed brush, and I'll just scrape away by painting with black. We'll clean up the edge of that collar right there. We'll clean up the edge of that sleeve right there. There we go. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to erase the color off the buttons because this blue is for the fabric, not the buttons. So I'll just come in with a small brush of black and just kind of erase these little button areas right here. Might add a little more brightness to his suit, like they're little silver buttons or bright plastic. Right in there. We'll scrape out the color off of that button. Go around a little more. There we go. And let's erase off of this button right here. Kind of comes into the fabric right there. And we've got one more down in here. There we go. All right, I'll zoom out. Yeah, that added a little brightness to the outfit. Okay, that outfit is just looking way too dark. So again, once you're done with your layer mask, click on it, click the trash, and apply. Permanently clean up those edges. Right next to your layer blending modes, you have your opacity. And I'll just slide that back to give him more of a tinted blue. And I think I like that look. Now, I'm going to save my progress. File and save. And now, here at the end, once you look at it, let's say you decide, darn it, I should have made his hair darker. Okay? What you can do is go to the brown hair. It's right there. And what you've really done is just painted a blob of paint. So if I strip off all the other layers, the only thing on this entire layer is this little blob of paint. All this checkerboard is transparency. Here's a fun thing to play with. If I look right above my layers, it says lock. Right next to the word lock is a little button that's called lock transparency. Now, mine's not popping up right now, so let's see if I can change that in my preferences and tools. Let's say show tooltips. Let's see if that pops up now. Yep, lock transparent pixels. So that helps you to identify these buttons, especially if you're brand new and you don't know what they stand for. So right here, I'm going to lock the blank parts of this layer. I will never be able to paint anywhere around here. So now all I have to do is mix another color. Let's say he's a kid of 2023 and he's got this dyed pink hair. Okay. I'll come in and grab some lighter color, take my brush, and I can dye his hair. Okay. Really cool. He can be painted any color. I can click here and say, okay, maybe I want him with green hair. And I paint him with green hair. But I want him to look a little more natural since the photo's from the 20s. So I'm going to click here and go in with my reddish browns, kind of right up in here. Give him a little more of a redhead kind of appearance. And we'll paint that in. There we go, a little darker. Okay, that is how you properly colorize a black and white photo. So now that you know the process, I'm not going to colorize the entire background. It's really about emphasizing the kid, the main subject of the photo. Now that you know the process, this, like I said in the beginning of the video, is my demo. You do not have this file. I'm going to show you in the next subsequent tutorial the two files you do have to choose from. And I look forward to seeing what you can come up with now that I have shown you how to do it. I'll see you in the next tutorial in just a minute.